Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Mateo Zimmermann, Investment Manager at CEMEX Ventures, Chris Bone, CEO and co-founder of Modulous, and Tim Davies, CEO of HiiROC. We tackled key global issues around the climate crisis and housing affordability and different technologies out there to help address those ongoing issues. Those unfamiliar with the hydrogen space and the TAM of it, here is a fact for you. Hydrogen is over $100 billion industry globally. So to find out more how it can be used to save carbon emissions, please tune into this podcast because it's truly fascinating. Another fun fact you might not know is that 138 million tons of waste a year is generated by the construction industry. So in this podcast, you'll also find out how Modulous addresses this issue, whilst also making construction far more affordable in an industry with famously low margins. Last but not least, Mateo gives some great examples throughout the podcast of various use cases of green tech companies like carbon clean, carbon upcycling, or alternative ways of storing energy like Energy Vault, but also different delivery methods of energy like PartRunner. As you can see, so many different parts of the construction industry are covered here. So it's a worthwhile listen. And as ever, thank you so much for tuning in, and feel free to reach out to me or any of my guests.
This is the Propcast, and I'm Louisa Dickins. Before we introduce our guest, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Hey, it's Michael Beckerman, the CEO of PropTech. We are the largest conference and media company devoted to the PropTech industry. Real excited to announce our 2023 schedule. First stop is the magazine in London, May 10th and 11th, followed by the Javits Center in New York City, September 19th to the 21st. We'll also be staging a dedicated climate event in Europe, coming on the heels of our hugely successful Copenhagen event that we staged last year. For more information, please visit pretech.com. We hope to see you at one of our conferences in 2023.
Today, we have three very special guests joining us, and they are from construction, hydrogen, and the VC space. We're going to be hearing how investment into these technologies and areas can assist in solving key global issues surrounding the climate crisis and housing affordability. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome to the show Mateo Zimmermann, who's investment manager at CEMEX Ventures, Chris Bone, CEO and co-founder of Modulous, and Tim Davies, CEO of HiiROC.
Hello.
Hey, Lou.
Hi, Lou. Thank you very much for having us.
It's a pleasure to have three of you on. As we all know, the global economy endured a pretty tough 2022 with decades of high inflation, sapping post-lockdown spending and pushing central banks to hike borrowing costs at an unprecedented rate to bring it under control. Yet, despite poor projections and overall decline in VC funding, 2023 represents an optimistic year for startups in the construction technology sector. In 2022, I read that total investment reached an impressive 5.38 billion, which is obviously a huge increase on the years before. And we're hoping to see further increases in these technologies, especially around the seed to sort of Series A and B. Now, we're going to be talking about these technologies and how they can actually help us reduce the global carbon footprint and obviously solve housing affordability, or at least help on that side. So this is what our guests are going to be talking about. So why don't we start off with introducing our guests? So Mateo, you're the man that sort of introduced me to Chris and Tim here. Can you share with us a little bit more about your journey to this space? What, I guess, for our audience as well who don't know who CEMEX Ventures are, what's the mission? What's the focus? What's the whole purpose behind it?
Yeah, sure. So we at CEMEX Ventures, we're the corporate venture capital and open innovation arm of CEMEX. So CEMEX Ventures has been developing relationships with entrepreneurs, with investors and other corporations to build a better future together. Our focus areas, that's how we call them, and it's also in relationship with CEMEX strategic priorities. So we have four categories as focus areas, which are called green construction, which I'll detail maybe later, supply chain for construction, also what we call enhanced productivity as kind of addressing the famous productivity gap that we have in construction. And also another area which we call with the future of construction is now, and that, as I said, aligns with CEMEX's strategy of digitalization, climate action, and circularity. And all that is actually targeted at all the different stakeholders So we add value to entrepreneurs, innovative companies, to CEMEX, to investors, and build professionals. And we have, obviously, it's also our mission to forge great relationships with other industry players that share the same passion to build a better future together. And we do that in different ways, all that innovation and open innovation. So we obviously invest in companies, and we actively are involved with the companies. We have a portfolio of 25 companies. But we also do an acceleration program that we call Leaplab, where we pick certain companies that we try to bring to the market together with us, with CEMEX. We also host the largest construction startup competition worldwide. We do that with other top players from the industry, and also to support a wider range of companies, because obviously we fall in love with a lot of companies out there, but there's so much we can invest. So every year we name the top 50 construction tech companies in our industry.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And talking of falling in love with some construction technology companies, we've got two of them on the show today. So Chris, why don't we start off with you? Could you share with the audience how you got into this space? Obviously, you're one of the investments of CEMEX. What does your product do? What's the whole focus of it?
Yes, hi, Lou. Thanks for having me on the show. Mateo, I can't believe we've fallen in love. I think it was probably 3 years ago that we first met, and we've been building a digital and physical technology platform since then that enables the delivery of quality, affordable, and of course sustainable homes very, very quickly, and it's something that can be scaled globally. And when we met Mateo, we went through the whole process of presenting where our dreams and ambitions were at that seed stage in the process. And as we've gone through these 3 years, we've now built these technologies that allow these things to happen. CEMEX have been amazing for us through this process because they're thought leaders in their space. They have great views on how the industry can be changed, and that's something that we're very keen to help facilitate. Our vision is to help solve the housing crisis whilst protecting the planet. So very lofty ambitions at a very high level. But we don't set our stall out to do that. And I know Tim's ambitions are similarly huge, vast in terms of the ESG space. And that's something we're probably going to speak a little bit more about later on.
Absolutely. Thanks for introducing yourself, Chris. Now, Tim, last but not least.
And it was love at first sight, I have to say.
What about, okay, well, let's talk about Tim. Who do you prefer out of your investments? I'm joking. Tim, you obviously introduce yourself.
It's great to be here. I would say I'm feeling a little bit like I'm two-timing Alfredo, who's our CEMEX Ventures guy. So Alfredo and I have been dating since, I think, early last year, or perhaps even the end of the year before. So kind of on our journey, we're formed in 2019, and CEMEX got involved at the end of 21, early 2022. To explain to the listeners, I'm sure everybody's heard about hydrogen, right? And what do? We produce hydrogen. Other than the obvious things, it's probably worthwhile just explaining a little bit about it. So hydrogen's a great fuel because it has a huge amount of energy in it. And when you use it, burn it, you create water. You don't create carbon dioxide. So it's a fantastic fuel. The problem is, how do you make it? So it's currently made by a process called steam methane reforming, which is taking methane, CH4, adding steam, and that produces a lot of hydrogen affordably, but it also produces a lot of carbon dioxide. So it's worse than just using the fossil fuel in the first place. Alternatively, water electrolysis, everybody's talking about, so-called green hydrogen, basically splits water apart, makes hydrogen and oxygen, and then you use the hydrogen. The problem with that is it requires a huge amount of energy and cost to be able to split water, and therefore it makes the hydrogen incredibly expensive, and therefore makes it difficult to be used. What our business does is it fills that gap. So it's affordable, clean, zero CO2 hydrogen. What we do is the electrolysis of hydrocarbons, so methane or any of the others, split apart into hydrogen and solid carbon. So as a result, you basically get affordable hydrogen, and therefore it can get used in the wealth of things that we'll talk about today and across the other sectors. And in effect, we are rolling out the production of hydrogen, but we're working with partners like CEMEX to say, how do we use it in the right settings? So how do you use it to produce cement? How do you use it to produce steel, or for transport, all the other use cases that you've got of hydrogen? That's us.
Thank you for that. I'd love to hear a little bit more. You can maybe go into this later. But if there's any examples of when you say hydrogen is affordable, like how much cheaper can you make it? I don't know if you've got any stats you can share with me in the audience now, because everyone's looking at counting the pennies at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true across the board. So If you look at the hydrogen economy already, it's already over $100 billion US globally because it's used a lot in refineries and in fertilizer production. So we're already using a lot of hydrogen. To get it used elsewhere, we have to find a more affordable way of doing it because the current way, the cheap way, steam methane reforming, produces a huge amount of carbon dioxide. Whereas watery electrolysis can typically be 4 or 5 times as expensive because it just requires a huge amount of energy. So that bit in between, how do you get hydrogen at steam methane reforming prices, but with no carbon dioxide? That's the challenge. So there's a bunch of companies working on that. And we think we're pretty much the leader in that sector because it has to be the same price as other processes. Otherwise, it's not cost effective to use it, whether you're using it in refineries, fertilizer production, construction or transport.
We've obviously mentioned 2 big challenges facing the construction industry. Obviously, it's affordability, which obviously comes into the housing crisis, and it's the climate crisis at the moment, all the emissions that the construction industry releases. Mateo, I guess you can probably give a slightly more holistic answer to this, but how big are these challenges? Obviously, you covered different technologies that obviously help with addressing them, but what would you say is the biggest challenge facing it and what can be done?
Yeah, we're very efficient and pragmatic in trying to map all those trends, mega trends that we're seeing in the industry, how that relates to construction as well. And I have to say, there is a lot of different challenges in our industry. I remember we come from, so the challenges our industry is facing are unheard of. We can only tackle them, and I want to emphasize on that we can only tackle them if we industry players collaborate to build a better future. And I remember a decade ago, we started talking about the productivity gap in construction as McKinsey diagnosed it or called it. And that actually means that there is low innovation. The score is very, very bad compared to other industries, right? But obviously there's, besides productivity, which has a lot of root causes that I can also share from our perspective. But now on top of that, we obviously have a very clear climate urgency, and we know that construction and operations of buildings and infrastructure makes 40% of carbon emissions. And we need to act now, and we need to act decisively and without excuses, right? So I would say those are kind of obviously, and that's why Tim and Chris are here today as well. But those are very, very clear pain points that we see from the industry. There's other kind of from a social impact perspective, safety is, our industry is still one of the industries with more fatalities worldwide. So that's something that concerns us. And obviously also that's part of the values of CEMEX is also around safety. So we try to tackle that as well in construction. And there's obviously other, in terms of environment, things that we don't hear so often is obviously about, for example, waste that is generated by our industry. So construction and demolition generates 1/3 of the world's overall waste. Just for the UK, I read the other day, it's 138 million tons per year, which is the equivalent of 35 Eiffel Towers per day, right? So that's also a massive problem. As part of actually Chris and Modulous solution is tackling waste as well, which is the other factor that we take into account on solving the problem. Kind of in the end, and going back to that productivity problem, we're a highly fragmented industry, right? There is multiple stakeholders with different interests, low collaboration, and that is the root cause for a lot of problems. But also, we're a project-based industry where innovation dies with the project. So after the project ends, kind of that innovation is not taken forward, right? And we do prototypes, so there's a lot of learnings and innovation that we could be using on a more strategic level, right? So I think that strategic collaboration with a long-term vision would be very relevant. And obviously the other problem is the low margins of our industry. I mean, some of these problems are things we can't solve, right? The low margins, is that something that we can change? Maybe with different methodologies of construction, right? Or new approaches like modulars, right? But it's also difficult in construction to show. So innovation has to be kind of very short, kind of the result has to be very short term. So the ROI doesn't look very good. And especially a small failure doesn't compensate the potential high return of bringing innovation, right? So it's a very risk-averse industry. So that makes it challenging. right? But that's why there's very interesting projects and companies like HiiROC, like Modulous coming to the market to help do that, and why we also believe there's a blue ocean in front of us of opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Well, whilst, Mateo's just had outlined all the challenges facing construction industry, Chris, what do you want to share with us a little bit more, maybe how Modulous addresses the ESG issues, or addresses productivity, balancing all these things, and any sort of examples of some of your clients or projects you're working on so our audience can be more familiar? It would be fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. I think Mateo touched on a lot of the challenges, and addressing these challenges is something that we're all trying to do every day of the week. One of the biggest that he touched on there was waste, and waste comes in two forms. It comes in the form of landfill, but it also comes in the form of carbon and wasted carbon. And actually, by reducing waste considerably, you're reducing carbon. So actually, that has a twofold benefit. So we're continually looking at both the physical product and the carbon content of that product. And until you understand the carbon content, it's very difficult to therefore drive change to improve that, or to be able to track it and understand exactly what level of carbon is, in our instance, in our example, being put into buildings. So these are all interconnected. There's a very tight link between supply chain, between material technology, between digital technology, tracking and mapping and understanding what the levels of carbon are. But until you get to that point, it's very, very difficult to drive decarbonisation. We've set out very sort of, again, lofty ambitions in terms of ESG and getting towards negative zero embodied carbon by 2030. And these are the ambitions that we all have to set ourselves in order to actually stand any chance of making significant change. You asked originally about the challenges in the industry, and I actually wanted to just retouch back on that, because actually I think the biggest challenge is making change. I think it's a very antiquated industry, and we've all been in it for decades. Well, at least I have. And I've watched the years go by and very little change. And when you come to make change, people are very, very resistant to change. And you can invest all you want in innovation and technology, but unless people's mindsets change, then actually it's very difficult to take that innovation and drive that into the industry. So I think one of the biggest challenges is bringing new and young blood into the industry. Skills are falling away. The educated are going to different industries, and I think we've got to redirect them back towards construction industry and make it an industry that's driven by innovation, technology, and change. Because if we don't do that, then it's just going to continually get worse, or at best remain the same.
Yeah, that's something which LMRE we're working pretty hard to do. That's getting people from adjacent industries, or getting the young to sort of learn about the innovation that's happening in it. Also, you mentioned about how this change can happen. Obviously, Law 97 in New York's being created, which I presume is probably a good thing for you, where next year every building, which is, I think it's over 25,000 square feet, will be required to meet the new energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emission limits, which I think will be very difficult for a lot of those buildings to do. Well, obviously they're going to have to lease it. So there's going to be a lot of fines going on, I imagine, which after regulations like that happen more globally, I reckon we'll start seeing maybe more technology being adopted, more change happening. I don't know if any of you agree with what I say there.
I think unless change is led from the top, then it will never happen. It's got to come from policy level. And whilst they might be stretch ambitions or stretch targets to reach, if we don't stretch them, then we're never going to improve at the step changes that we have to in order to make significant change to the environment. So yes, it's something that's needed. It has to come from the top and down, and people have to find new ways and drive new technologies to help make that happen.
It's quite interesting though, so we work on hydrogen across the sectors, transport, power generation, through to construction and other industrial decarbonisation. You're in a sector that is actually far faster moving than you realise. So for example, when we're working with the Boeings of this world about trying to use hydrogen powered planes, that's on a 25-year cycle, right? So they've still got, most of their planes will still be active from, years ago before they can implement new hydrogen powered planes. So 2050 is the earliest you could get a fleet of hydrogen planes in the sky, replacing what was there before, in effect. Whereas you guys, like you just said, Lulu, you can put a new bit of legislation in place that becomes in force next year. So I actually think you should celebrate the speed at which you do stuff. I understand the frustrations of getting stuff done, and it could be quicker, Chris. I completely agree. But actually, you're a more fast-moving industry than you realise compared with the other ones that we work with. I like the fact that there's an action of, we need to do this, we need to do it now, let's get on with it. Now, I have to admit I'm completely biased because our main exposure has been to the CEMEX guys, and they kind of just get on and get it done. So it is a little bit unfair that, my sample set is very narrow, but it's just fascinating to work with a partner like that says, you know what, you've got some really interesting stuff here on affordable hydrogen. How's all the different ways we can use it? So how do we use it to remove or reduce our carbon footprint of cement production? But actually, what clever properties can we get as we do it? Our byproduct is solid carbon, right? So just to be clear, so that everybody listening knows, when Chris talks about the embedded carbon, he means the embedded CO2 in making something. So carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, bad. Carbon, solid carbon, are really quite a useful thing. So it's the clever thing in your car tires and in a bunch of other things like toner that does a lot of good. And it's completely stable. It's your pencil lead, right? It's not going to decompose to carbon dioxide. So the guys in one of the CEMEX teams are looking about how they use that byproduct that we produce, solid carbon, to put it into cement to make it stronger, lightweight, and therefore use less cement. So that level of innovation that's kind of going on, I'm biased, right? I see it in CEMEX and think it's fantastic, and it's a great partner to work with. Compared with like a Boeing, and I'm picking on Boeing because they're a big brand name, it just takes a very long time in their industries to make a difference. So I hear your frustrations, Chris, but at the same time, I applaud the efforts that are being done and the speed with which it's being done. Notwithstanding all of that, to stay on my soapbox for one final point, sorry, Lily, I absolutely appreciate it's a very, very tight margin business. Therefore, when you look at cement or steel and the like, to suddenly introduce a much higher energy cost because you're using hydrogen, not natural gas or whatever else, is nigh on impossible. So we as technology providers have to provide the solution that makes it affordable. If it's not affordable, we can't do this on subsidies. It has to be cost effective for the guys to do it. Otherwise, it's not ever going to work in the long term.
But also going back to our point about the education around how many people are educated on the use of hydrogen, or the price point, or anything from any age. Like, you don't really talk about it at school. Out of your hydrogen community, you guys all know about it, but that it's not spoken about at all, really.
Yes, but we talk about space rockets, right? Space rockets have been using hydrogen for years because it's a really, really good fuel. So if you think about it as probably one of the best fuels out there, the question is, how do we get to use it? So the Centricas of this world, who we work with, similar to CEMEX, are really good because they're saying, we want to go from British gas to British hydrogen. How do we do that? How do we work with people like HiiROC to make that effective? So when it starts going into our homes, the trials that NGN are doing around hydrogen-powered boilers and so forth, it then becomes things that consumers just accept. Yeah, hydrogen is just like natural gas, but it's better. Fantastic. And then we can start using it, and we're training up 2,000 Centrica engineers, or working with 2,000 Centrica engineers to implement and manage our kit for us. So hopefully that kind of adoption will get it out there.
Are you guys seeing a wide adoption in certain areas? Like, obviously, when it comes down to clean energy, the Nordics, as we all know, are way ahead than places like the US. Tim, have you seen this?
Mr. Biden has made a hell of a difference with, obviously, the ERA scheme, which has got so much interest in what they're doing there. But naturally, it's almost, for global operations, you can think a bit smarter about where you operate. So can you produce in the US because you get massive incentives? But actually, like you say, in the Nordics, where you've got, in places, base load renewable energy from hydro projects, that's fantastic. You can do so much there. The problem being, obviously, in the construction industry, it's pretty hard to make green steel or green cement in one place and then ship it thousands of miles to where you actually need it. So we need to find cleverer ways on my side of the equation to make hydrogen in good places and get it to where you need it, so you can get the benefit where it's needed rather than with a huge transport cost. It's much easier, obviously, to transport a molecule like hydrogen than it is to transport cement or steel.
And then, Mateo, you touched on other challenges to do with the supply chain issues. Are there, and obviously to do like tracking deliveries, which kind of goes back to what Tim's talking about, like the whole logistical issues behind this, and then how that impacts safety and everything like that. Is there any other technologies or growth areas which you want to share with us?
Yeah, let me, if I may, I want to comment quickly on the pace of innovation, as Tim was saying, kind of, because I think there's a difference, right? It's kind of CEMEX, obviously, as a large building material producer, is a little bit in the intersection between an industry and construction, obviously, which is industry for construction. So I think the paces are also a little bit different. There's obviously a lot of innovations in terms of materials that are happening, but not necessarily there is a adoption on the job site, right, on construction. So I think, and that's, for example, in terms of, for example, cement, green cement, that it's being produced and it's advancing pretty quickly. Obviously, there's a higher adoption, I think, in construction if you still call it cement, right? Because there's all the regulation, there is all the norms that are being used, and it has a big impact, right? But if there's new materials coming in, it's much more difficult to get adoption, right? Because it's something new, it's not regulated, it's no one knows how it will behave, right? So that makes it also a little bit more difficult. I think the right way to do it, obviously, because about innovation, there's different ways, and obviously we should leverage a lot of different materials that there are. But obviously, if it's easier if you just improve what you already have. There's a lot of assets, obviously, in the industry around cement production and so on. It's better use of it if you use it and then produce, more obviously climate-friendly materials, right? And that's actually one of the biggest lines we're working on. Obviously, what I mentioned before, green construction is 48% of our portfolio, right? And it's growing, so it's the biggest area for us, and we do a lot of different things actually to improve the materials. So that's obviously a big part. So carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a big part of that. So we have, for example, in investments in carbon clean and carbon upcycling, which carbon clean is carbon capture based in the UK actually, and carbon upcycling, a very interesting company around carbon utilization. Then obviously alternative fuels is, for example, hydrogen is a very good example, as Tim was saying. So proud to be backing HiiROC on that front. Then we have other interesting things like, for example, CO2, converting CO2 into fuel. So we have an investment in a company called Synhelion, which converts actually solar heat into CO2 in what is called solar fuels, used, for example, in aviation. Then other examples that are, for example, converting waste to energy, also as related to two problems that we were mentioning before: waste generation and kind of obviously in landfill. So you can actually use kind of municipal waste to convert that into energy, which is fascinating. And we invested in a company actually called Waste to Energy in Barcelona. Then in terms of circular economy, we do a lot of different things. There's a very interesting company in the US called Soy Connect that we invested in that actually commercializes waste soil. So people that actually, if you want to get rid of soil when you're doing your excavations, there's someone else who might need it for other purposes. So it's connecting those pieces. Or drastically changing the paradigm is energy storage companies like Energy Vault, which is a very interesting company. That's some examples about in green construction, as well, how we call it. But there's, like you were saying, Lou, a lot of other interesting topics. Supply chain. That's something that we identified from the very beginning from CEMEX Ventures, that it had to work differently because it's a very inefficient process. How materials are, how do you design with materials, with what specs, how that is estimated, procured, delivered to site. It's very inefficient, and obviously materials is a large part of the construction budget, so from 40 to 60%, depending on the country, and it's highly inefficient. It's actually one of the biggest reasons for delays in construction. So we want to make sure, obviously, you specify, you have all the right information, you know actually the performance of those materials, not only in terms of CO2, but also, and obviously costs, but also water usage and so on. You have all the information, but also all the way across the kind of until it arrives to site, and then how it's implemented. So we're looking at different technologies there that are kind of from tracking deliveries to managing deliveries from the site. So like a Google Calendar specifically for very large construction sites where logistics is very complex, to make sure everything arrives when it should be, the people are ready when materials arrive, and so on. And also different solutions, very innovative, to make sure there's alternative delivery methods, like, for example, a company called PartRunner in our portfolio, which makes sure that it's a delivery marketplace, or also even kind of as a social project, having owner operators that can drive the materials to site. So there's very exciting opportunities. I can be spending here 1 hour describing them all.
Thank you for that. Chris, back to, I guess, Modulus in terms of the area which Modulus covers. Mateo, who when I went into a few of them a little bit more to slight supply chain issues, productivity, tracking deliveries. How does Modulus sort of get involved on that side?
Well, the supply chain is fundamental to our business model. We've actually moved all the heavy lifting manufacturing up to the OEM manufacturing level, and then we bring components and sub-assemblies flat packed locally to the site to be assembled into a volumetric product near the site with last mile delivery. And by doing that, it becomes much more of an assembly process akin to the automotive industry, where we're actually bringing just-in-time, just-in-sequence deliveries of flat packs for modules that are to be installed into the project, but letting all of that heavy lifting, as I said, manufacturing happen up at the OEM level. By doing that, we're also actually removing the working capital onus from the modular manufacturers, those that actually have the smallest balance sheets in the process, but have to effectively fund between 50 and 70% of some project, because they've got to buy all the single components, they've got to assemble them into modules, they've then got to move them to site to be installed before they can apply for payment, and then they've got to wait their credit terms to be paid. Using a much more slick process, bringing the product from the OEM through to site very quickly means that the contractor might even get paid for that component before they have to pay for it. So it starts to become a much more manageable process, and is one of the reasons modern methods of construction, as we call it, hasn't really taken off over the last 20 years, and one of the problems that we as an industry are working hard to solve. So supply chain is fundamental. The engagement between supply chain and a project is fundamental, and by digitizing a big piece of that, we can then start to control that much more effectively, ensuring that the product is moved along that process and capitalized. Yeah, that's the sort of the key to that process.
Yeah, it seems like collaboration between obviously stakeholders, the construction world, but also the innovators like you guys is going to be sort of key, whether it's sort of having a partner, which also integrates with your technologies, because there's so many moving parts within construction, as I've learned, and shows the audience over this season. Quite a scary part, very expensive moving parts. Conscious of time here, and those who are listening in, it's Monday, and we've all had one hell of a start to the week. I'd love to ask each, and Tim, I'll start off with you. What, in terms of, say, the future construction, what does it look like to you? What are you sort of excited for when it comes down to sort of innovation, or within the space of hydrogen technology? What does it mean for construction?
Strangely enough, the thing I'm most excited about is the use of the carbon byproduct that we produce. So we've got one client who's actually looking at 3D printing with the carbon. So in effect, it's taking a waste, a byproduct from our process, which is completely inert, and building from it. So it's that kind of level of innovation of saying, you know what, I'm going to take that over there, which is virtually free. I'm going to add value, do something with it. But also by doing that, sequester the carbon into a solid, building. That's really cool. So that level of innovation that we're kind of seeing is, it's quite exciting for where it could go. I absolutely buy Mateo's point that legislation and regulation and checking that it's safe and everything else will take years to actually implement. But the fact is people are playing around with that and seeing if they can get it to work. So yeah, excited for the future.
Thank you for that. Mateo, what about you? What are you most excited about?
I mean, it's our vision is really building a better future, right? So I like the way we kind of the word future in there. So we need to build better. We need to and more sustainable, right? So that's what I imagine in the future, and that means obviously solving the challenges that we mentioned before, making sure it's kind of socially responsible, it's environmentally responsible. That's for me the biggest thing, right? We need to make sure everyone has access to homes. We know it's not easy, and especially in some geographies, like for example the UK, it's very difficult to buy a home, right? So that's what troubles me, and that's what kind of our passion has to be right, and to solve those issues, right? And there's a lot of interesting methodologies. We're looking forward for 3D printing, for example, as a very interesting technology. I think right now it's more for specific use cases. It's scaling pretty fast, more than we ever thought, which is very interesting. But obviously modular construction is also, it tackles so many different things that we discussed, right? It's sustainability, it's affordable homes, it's cost, it's quality. There's so many problems or safety, right? That's another one I mentioned. I think it will drastically improve a lot of different aspects. That's why I love modular construction. And yeah, it's just it has to be sustainable. We have to look for future generations, and our industry also makes 40% of CO2 emissions, right? So we need to tackle that as soon as possible, and that's not only with new build but also with renovations. Kind of that's the elephant in the room, is there's so many buildings already, right? So it has to be also economically viable. So we have to think about renovations as well.
Yeah, in one of the podcasts we recorded earlier with the City of London, I think it's going to cost 108 billion to retrofit the City of London, and it's going to need 40,000 new talented workforce to help do it. And those are obviously a rare skill sets our City of London do not have at the moment, but the budget's there. So that's another interesting podcast for you guys to listen to. Chris, I obviously haven't forgotten about you. What are you most excited about?
In the construction space, productization. I think the standardization of the components that we use to build buildings is fundamental. Once we've productized them, we can then digitize them. And once you've digitized them, then you can cut out huge periods of time it takes to design buildings, and you can cut out huge periods of time it takes to build buildings. And I think, as Mateo said, to scale the delivery of homes is going to take a huge reduction in the time it takes to do it in order to recycle capital, recycle labor, recycle all the different elements of that supply chain that enable us to build these homes. So, yeah, I think the times are changing at the moment. I think we've gone, taking Tim's point earlier about how quickly we have or haven't innovated. We've been building buildings the same way we have been for decades, if not longer. I think at the moment, digitization starting to come into the fold to a level where we can start to really scale up the delivery of not just homes, but of all necessary amenities around the residential space as well. So yeah, it is an exciting time, and looking forward to seeing where it all lands.
Right, we've got to the LMRE part, the final part, and conscious of time, so we're going to make it quite quick and snappy. So the L is touch on one of the main lessons you've learned throughout your career. Mateo, this one could be for you, if you'd like to share with your answer with the audience.
That's my favorite part. For me, it's kind of the main lessons. It's the importance of people. So the talent that you see, the relationships that you build, right? That's the main reason for working with Modulous or HiiROC is really the people, right? So that's what's drive that we've talked a lot about mentality, how it has to change, and that comes from people, right? So that's for me the main lesson.
Thank you for that. Right. This one, actually, Mateo, I'll give you two questions, and I feel like you can be this is to give anyone, a person, a product, or service, a shout out. Who would you like it to go to? You can give a few if you like. Obviously, the HiiROC and the Modulous people are a given.
No, I'll give it to Chris and Tim. It's been great working with them. So, and that's why we obviously we discussed to have this podcast together. So it's for them.
I was only going to shout out Alfredo, who works in Mateo's team and is an absolute star. Seriously, the CEMEX Ventures guys, for anybody that's out there looking for investment, I'm not just saying it because I've been invited on this podcast. It is a different and refreshing way of doing it. We come up with cool stuff together. So, yeah, straight back at you, Mateo.
I think it's worth noting as well. I know everyone listening, some are listening in from the US, some listening in from Singapore, Australia. CEMEX is obviously a lot of their focus is within Europe, but they've also are hiring a team to look at the whole North American market. So if you are interested, Mateo and his team would, I'm sure, love to hear from you as well. So we'll get all the details at the end. Right. The final two questions. Chris, this one's for you. What's been the most rewarding part working within the construction technology space for you?
Seeing things change, seeing change happen, seeing things happen faster. It's so exciting when you see something that you set out to deliver. We set out actually as designers to digitize ourselves. And the first time I saw our software platform designing a building on its own was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. So I think when you start to set about making change and seeing that change happen, that's a very, very rewarding part of working in ConTech.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Right, Tim, last one to you. What are you most excited about for the future of? Let's keep it obviously specific to the hydrogen space, because for me, it's a whole new area of energy I have so little knowledge about. And I'm really looking forward to, I guess, personally seeing the growth and seeing more use examples of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of use examples of hydrogen in construction, from producing the cement to replacing diesel gen sets to heating inside buildings that we're doing. That's all exciting. But I guess the thing that's most exciting about ConTech for us is just the scale, right? You've got to remember, if you looked at cement as a country, it would be the third largest emitter in the world after China and America. So being in an industry that can have that level of impact on global warming, it's pretty cool. Don't knock the efforts that everybody is doing. It's going to make a hell of an impact.
I might have to steal that fact from you about it being basically the size of China as a sort of country in terms of emission. That's crazy. Right. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us. It is a Monday afternoon, and obviously what's been a fairly challenging and busy month. Well, start to the month for us all. Everyone who's listening and you want to hear more about these products, reach out to either founders. They'd be delighted to hear from you. If you're looking to get on to looking for investment, speak to the CEMEX guys. Hopefully, I'm just hearing what two of their portfolios have been saying about them, how they've actually supported them in their growth, go to market. It's pretty something special. So thank you for listening in, and thank you to my guests for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lou, and all the Propcast team. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks very much.
Making a high-quality podcast like this one takes a lot of work. That's a fact. But not when you hire a podcast company. With our white glove experience, we handle everything for you. From guest outreach all the way through to publishing and promotion, we handle it all. You show up to hold great interviews and build relationships with your guests, and we take care of everything else. Podcasting is not just about the audience. Every podcast interview is the start of a new relationship. With a weekly podcast, you'd build relationships with 52 ideal partners or prospects through your podcast interviews over the next 12 months. Do you believe that 52 new relationships would help grow your business? We do. Contact Jason at apodcastcompany.com and let's talk.